All right. Well, Coach Cook, man, it's good to catch up with you. I know we had a good conversation down at Summer Strong. I've kind of been like really bragging about Summer Strong to like everybody because I didn't realize how cool it was going to be. I mean,
Yeah.
and how just easy it was going to be to network. Like I kind of felt like everybody was still kind of be like, I don't know, uptight, but it was definitely not like that at all. It was like complete opposite of what I was kind of expecting to an extent. So, how many years have you been going to Summer Strong?
No, this is my first year to go to Summer Strong. Yeah,
Okay.
obviously with the schedule, it's a little bit tough getting out,
Right.
and this year, finally was able to make it. I've known Bird and those guys for a long, long time. I think they installed us originally our big weight room in 2014-ish. So I've kind of
Okay.
known those guys since then. But yeah, this is the first time I could go. I'm with you. It's an amazing experience. So if people haven't gone there, definitely recommend. It's one of the ones you got to hit.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It kind of worked out perfect for us this semester. So next year, if it's like around the same time, that was like after finals. So I'm gonna try to save enough money in my budget to at least pay for some of my coach's expenses and stuff to be able to go because it's definitely something I think is awesome, especially for like a young coach to be able to go and not only hear
Oh
the
yeah.
speakers but like go and meet people. So and we'll get to like your career path, but that's the other thing too. Is I kind of felt like a little bit of like a poser because like I don't have any Sorinex equipment because I can't just renovate our weight room. Like all of our weight room stuff when I got hired was all Rogue stuff, which again I like Rogue, but it's like I kind of felt like a poser because it's like I'm not a Sorinex person because I've never been able to like build a weight room. So you guys have Sorinex gear then basically?
Yeah, we're Sorinex at every single one of our affiliates actually. So yeah,
Oh wow.
yeah, five affiliates, two full academies. Yeah, we've spent a decent amount of money with Sorinex
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. No, that's cool. That again, that kind of I think that kind of like makes it like you said, you kind of build like a more of a connection with them versus like I buy
Yeah.
stuff from Rogue and I'm dealing with a different salesperson every time I buy something. Like you don't feel like you're like I don't know part of the family. I guess is cliche, but kind of like you don't really feel like you're part of anything when you're doing shit like that. But well, like I said, I appreciate it. Looking forward to chatting with you. I tell especially Tyler, I've told him in the past, man, I really miss the pro baseball world. Like I loved being in it. I think I definitely got out of it. I was kind of forced out because of the COVID. They basically let everybody go, and it kind of
Oh
worked
yeah.
out perfect for me because I ended up this job at the D2 work opened up, and I love being at the D2 level. And now that I have a wife and a almost 15-month old, like that's probably not the best lifestyle, but man, when I was young, like those first couple of years, like that was awesome. I love just being around the guys and traveling with the team and getting to meet the other strength coach. Honestly, that's another thing that you really don't realize. Like you don't like at this level, like I could go an entire. I mean, I've gone almost 5 years and never met any other strength coach in our conference. Like I've talked to maybe one or two of the strength coaches. Um, at our in our conference, but it's like in the minor leagues, like you're getting to know like every coach from every other affiliate, every other team's affiliate and stuff like that. So it's a cool thing. So kind of just
Yeah,
give
for
us
sure.
your like overview of your coaching career and then obviously your time so far being in minor league baseball, which it sounds like you've been there for quite a while.
Yeah, this is my 12th year with the Pirates here. It's the only stop I've made in professional baseball. Before that, I started my career at University of Central Oklahoma, Division II at Edmond, Oklahoma, just outside Oklahoma City. Uh, kind of fell into that a little bit. I was going to school, sports medicine, pre-physical therapy. Did all my hours physical therapy, got accepted in physical therapy school, was kind of finishing my hours like this is not for me. Like I can't be in the clinic all day and do that. So end up getting I went to Radford University. That's where I did my undergrad in Southwest Virginia. And then I was kind of just looking for spots. I was going to intern for free at Radford, start some grad school work. Had a buddy that knew a guy that got the head job out at Central Oklahoma. I was kind of back home, uh, talking with him. This guy was looking for a GA that would come out and work for $600 a month. And for me, I was like, dude, that's way better than free, $600 a month. And they'd pay for some school. Never been to Oklahoma and decided to jump out, called him, ended up getting the job. And it was me and him. I want to say I was like 23 or 24 and he was 26. And so it was us two and like, I don't know, 18 teams or something like that. So that was like pure GA, get thrown in, immediately have four or five teams that he, had me in control of, writing stuff for, just making just terrible, terrible programs, to be honest. And, it's funny to look back on that once you get in your career a little bit. I'm sure you do the same thing, like all of us do. You look back on those programs that you wrote and you're like, what was I thinking? And that's kind of where I was at. But I learned a lot. I spent like 2.5 years there. Um, Came out of that thinking that I was in a really good spot, knew a lot of stuff. Applied to like I could pull up a folder I think I still have it in like my Dropbox somewhere. And I bet I just sent an application letter out with applications to like 70 schools coming out of that, right? Every job that popped open, I was just trying to get a job. Got interviewed for a couple that wouldn't really work out. And then the guy that was out there, they came out with an assistant spot. He was like, look, man, best thing for your career is not to be here. I'm not very well connected. I don't know a ton of people. You've kind of learned a lot from me, but you need to move on, try to find some more coaches to work at. And so I ended up taking an intern assistant position at Ohio State. I was at Ohio State for like 7 months, which was cool because I could work the 37 varsity sports there. And I basically just put as much time in with as many people as possible. Got to work under like 12 different strength coaches to where I could learn a ton of stuff. And then that ended up leading to the position with the Pirates, where I followed Carlo Alvarez, who was at St. Xavier at the time. High school, took the coordinator spot. Our director knew him, kind of hooked me up with an interview. I ended up getting an interview, taking a spot down there, and then, stepping stone my way, I guess, through the organization a little bit over the last 12 years. So, yeah, it's been a little bit of a ride and quite a journey so far. And, when you talk about feeling like a poser with not having Sorinex gear, like, I think we all feel like posers at different spots. And I definitely did as I was bouncing all over the place. And I mean, I think we all still do it sometimes.
Yeah, it's actually, I was listening to a podcast this morning with a guy, the guest, it was the Just Fly Performance podcast, and the guest was that Randy Huntington, and he's the guy that is training the Chinese sprinter. I can't think of his name, but like there was a kind of like a little
Yeah.
documentary about the Chinese sprinter. He's like got the best accelerator on the planet essentially. And he was saying that he's like in his 45th year of being a track kind of sprint coach. And he was saying that like every single year of his career, he feel like his whole thing is he's made training easier and easier. Like instead of making it more complex, he's like, I always
Yeah.
come back to making it easier. And it's like I've definitely like, especially being at Fairmont where I have 400 athletes and yeah, my assistants do a great job of helping me out. But it's like at the end of the day, it all kind of still falls on me because like I'm the only full-time person. So I definitely think that like, you mentioned, your old training programs. And I think probably the thing that I look back on is none of the exercises that I was doing were bad or silly. It was more like just the complexity. It was like too complex. Like not
Right.
only was
For
it too
sure.
complex, not only was it too complex for the athletes, it was probably too complex for me to try to coach those athletes. And like
Yeah.
it'd been better off just making it way more simple. So I'm definitely want to kind of come back to that later and talk about just maybe like things that you've changed over your career. But I do want to stay on the just the career progression. So obviously, I know there was, I guess they made those changes probably around the COVID time, 2020, 2021, something like that, where they went from having like low A, high A. Now it's only
Hmm.
just your A balls and then your rookie ball and then your Dominican leagues. So what has probably been, I guess, now with you being the coordinator, not necessarily like every detail of every path, like all the steps along the path, but I guess like maybe the things that have stood out about like, did you get like what was something that like a growth moment from working with A ball guys versus working with AAA guys versus working with like maybe your rookie ball guys versus anytime you've had a chance to work with the professional like the pro guys like in early spring training phases and things like that because I know for me like when I was first got hired by the Rockies like I don't know if I would have been a good fit for AAA guys like I just don't think I would have been I think part of it is like those guys are they're almost veterans to an extent some of those guys have been in AAA longer than there's guys that have been playing in the big league so it's one of those where like I don't think my personality would have been good because I was kind of just like I was more in your face and like wanting to like kick you in the ass versus a lot of those guys they
Yeah.
don't always love that. So I kind of just be especially because I know like specifically for Tyler and some of the other guys that are going to listen to this, like I guess maybe even just your approach over the years of working at each different level and kind of what some of the intricacies are, versus a rookie and a 17, 18-year-old Dominican kid or a 21-year-old college kid versus, a 30-year-old AAA guy. Kind of just take us through that process, I guess. I know it's a very
Yeah.
long-winded answer, but kind of just what's the thoughts there?
No, for sure. Yeah. I had a little bit, I was blessed with some really good coordinators that led me in some really good directions. I did a couple years at affiliates and they were at the lower levels. After that, it was kind of the opportunity to where they sat down with me and it was, where do you want your path to go? Do you want to jump up? Is your dream to be a major league strength coach? Is it to be more of a coordinator role? And then we're going to decide which path you move in. And so I've always been way more into the systems and processes, uh, building program than I have been. I want to be with the team and be the team guy, right? And so after a couple years here, then I made the move to come down and run the complex and do rehab. And like the rehab in the complex, you end up with 18 or 17-year-old kids from the DSL all the way up to exactly what you're saying, a 37-year-old that is rehabbing something that we're trying to get back on the major league team. And so we were a little bit shorter staffed at the time than we are now. So it gave me the opportunity to work with a way broader variety of players. And so I did that for a few years. I actually ended up getting the coordinator position in 2020, which was an awesome experience now looking back, and a really weird one when it was happening. But that was my first year where I was took the reins as a coordinator. And then since that point, I've kind of stepped from coordinator of strength conditioning, where I was just over the minor league strength conditioning. We've added significant staff to our DR Academy, and now we have an international coordinator as well that I manage. And then this year is my first year where we've added a full nutrition coordinator as well as a performance dietitian at every level instead of just like a nutrition assistant. And then I'm in a supervisory role over that as well. And so I think that every year I've kind of been blessed with the ability to have a new challenge and learn something new. And I think that opportunity, and to keep that in mind as you're in as you're in your career, I think that if every year you're not being faced with new challenges, then you probably are starting to outgrow your space. And I took this job, like, to be honest, I took this job in 2014 thinking, hey, this is a couple year stepping stone, and then I'll go somewhere else. I might go back to college. I might go back to college baseball and just do college baseball. And then every year I've kind of just been presented with a new challenge, and I've felt like I've been able to grow in our organization and then also grow our organization and strength conditioning inside of that. And so, I mean, like I said, I'm in year 12 and I'm still here and I'm really enjoying it. But I think it's a little bit unconventional of a path, because a lot of times you see guys go all the way up through every level and then end up in a coordinator position. Like I said, I was in a really good spot with really good coordinators that kind of separated out early to let me figure out what path I want to do, and then they placed me in the right challenges as I went on.
No, I mean that's awesome. No, you mentioned like the growth stuff, and that's definitely something that I've dealt with at the D2 level, because we're so underfunded, underserved. Like
Oh yeah,
we have so many athletes. Like we don't have any sports psychologists. We have no sports nutritionists. So I've had to kind of grow a little bit of that at Fairmont just by reaching out to like WVU and being like, hey, can you send us some sports psych students? Can you send us some
yeah,
sports nutrition students down here to just basically be unpaid interns to help us out, because we just don't have the resources for that stuff. So not so much in terms of managing it like at your level where you have now 5 sports dietitians at every affiliate, which again is crazy, because even when I was still with the Rockies, which the Rockies are, I mean, I don't want to say anything bad. I love my time there, but I don't know if they were going to be as willing to spend as much money and I don't know, they might be better now, but like when I was there, we had one sports nutritionist, I think, that basically bounced around to all the minor league
yeah,
affiliates, which I'm sure that's probably not
yeah,
uncommon from back then. And I think we had a big league sports site guy, and then he had like an assistant or like a GA. And they would all kind of each take turns spending time at the big leagues, then bouncing around for a week or so at each minor league affiliate. So it's one of those now where you're probably seeing that most organizations now have somebody at every single level, not just a strength coach, not just an athletic trainer, but the like the other support staff. So
yeah.
it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to hear.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the organization you're in, right? Like we have a really good performance development system or a player development system. I mean, I think that I would single us out as one of the top in terms of getting resources, right? It's all about what you do with the resources once you get them, though, is the most important thing. But I mean, when I started in 2014, we were doing all the food ordering,
Hmm.
we were doing all the supplement ordering, we were the diet, like quote
Yeah.
unquote nutrition help, right? Well, which for a lot of us that had never had anything to do with that except bro science stuff, right? You were just trying to make sure you had food. And I think we got like, I want to say when 2014 or 15, it was like $300 to feed the team on. And that's outrageous to think about now. But it was you were just doing your best to make sure there was food. So
That's
I
per
think
game,
that
like per game, like per night,
per
like three.
day, yeah, that's like what
Yeah.
our budget was. I remember at the time, like I think we were one that people were like, "Oh man, it's great that you guys get that kind of money to do that." But now, now seeing of where we're at fully staffed, it's outrageous. I mean, we're kind of in the infancy of being fully staffed as well. Our nutrition coordinator that we hired, Stephanie Koloff O'Neill, like she came to us from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. She's the first female dietitian to ever win a Super Bowl.
Mm.
And so, like, I'm talking about skill level is outrageous, and what she's doing with our staff is nuts. And I'm like, when I'm talking about new challenges, I'm learning so much just from that. And I think that I would encourage everybody exactly what you're talking about. If you don't have funding on that, then how can you reach out to find, people that want to help or people that are looking to get into sports that are willing to donate some time? Because I think there's a lot of things that us as strength conditioning coaches just don't know. Like we just don't know even what information they can use, what questions to ask. Like we know some supplementation, and I'll put that in quotes because I think we just know what we've used before.
Yep.
Kind of like when you get those ex-athletes that start training people and they just are doing whatever they did in college
Hmm.
and that's how they train people. I think that's where probably a lot of us are at on the nutrition and diet, like dietary supplement side. And so I think what you're talking about is great. Is if you don't have the funding, like reach out. There's so many people that are looking for an opportunity in sports, even if it's like, hey, I'm just going to try to come in a couple days a week to help out, just so then I can get, you know, in the off chance that someone from AD, whoever, gets to meet them and see some changes that they're doing. That's kind of how you get it added, right? You have to
Yeah.
show value first, and then that's where that comes from.
Yeah. No, I agree. And it's when I was actually with the Rockies, I think we got $15 per person. So
Yeah,
per meal, which is actually not
yeah.
bad. Like honestly,
Not at
we
all.
so I was in charge of that. And I actually kind of liked it because I am big into nutrition. I love to like eat healthy. And
Yeah,
so I mean we were, especially in the South Atlantic League, like you could go, like we go to Charleston, Columbia. Like I was
yeah,
reaching out to Whole Foods. We were getting like Whole Foods, like we were getting steak dinners. I mean, we were actually eating pretty dang good, and that's one of the things that the Rockies definitely did spend money on. Like I will say, they definitely spent money on
yeah,
food. Like even in spring training, our complex food was like it was better than when I was with the Yankees, like in their spring training complex. Like it was the Rockies food was definitely the best, like in terms of where the other places that I'd kind of experienced and talked to other coaches. But um, no, it's actually I have a meeting. It's funny you say that. I have a meeting next Wednesday with our AD and our foundation, our fundraising kind of organization to kind of help get this. We're trying to get a fueling station like up and running and off the ground. And
nice.
year one literally might be like homemade peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and chocolate milk. Like that might be it. But that's
Hey,
500 or 600 extra calories that are, especially our football guys, our male athletes, because they just don't eat. They're just like almost too lazy to eat, to like have any like anything to motivate them to eat. They would just rather just skip a meal than go to the cafeteria or whatever. So anyway,
for sure.
so I guess one of the things for me, that looking back again, like when I was with the Yankees, then with the Rockies, like definitely some different philosophical beliefs from the organizations themselves, but then even from the big league to the minor leagues. Um, and I don't know how much I don't want you to say anything like that you're gonna
No,
piss
you can
anybody
share
off or anything,
whatever.
but like what's kind of the philosophical beliefs in terms of the big league strength coaches and their philosophy
Hmm.
and how that aligns with the minor league. Because obviously you want it to be somewhat aligned, but obviously the big league guys aren't. You're not getting everybody's going to be homegrown on the big league roster. You're going to get guys from all over the place, and they can kind of do their own thing to an extent. To an extent. So I feel like it's easier probably to have certain standards and stuff in the minor leagues because everybody is kind of your
Yeah.
guys. So how do you guys kind of work that? What philosophy is there? One big philosophy, or is it kind of two that you try to mold together? Kind of just talk us through that, I guess.
No, I think it's a good question. I think that's asked by a guy that's probably been around baseball. So you can tell you've been around baseball to where you've seen some different organizations that do it differently, and major league can be completely split from minor league. You can have a top down, you can have one that works really well together. Where we're at as an organization, like just to talk about philosophy, right? We're looking at individual development so that it affects on-field performance. The only thing that matters is the on-field performance, right? There's only two reasons that guys don't play. It's either performance is poor or they're not healthy. And as we're looking towards the programming, individual development based on field performance is what the philosophy is. Okay. Now, when we're talking about methods to get that philosophy done, that's where you start to branch out a little bit. And as you know, in minor league baseball or just professional baseball in general. Like we have two strength coaches at the top. We have two in AAA, double A, high A, low A. We have three strength coaches, including our rehab strength coach at our academy in Florida. Then we have three strength coaches at our DSL academy. We all use the same type of like guardrail structure, I would say, for the most part. That being said, what gets filled inside of that structure is fully dependent on where we have the athlete based on an assessment and what they need to do on the field. And it's basically based on where an athlete is, how do we get them to do this on the field? And so that's where, as you start getting into, and like we could get super deep in this. I told you already, like I'm in to spend as much time as you want. I clear I
I'm up
cleared
for it.
some
Like,
time, right?
yeah, let's
But
go.
yeah, like as you look at it, as you look at our athletes, right? One of the hardest parts about baseball is that positional value is based on so many different variables. Okay. There are certain floors for different things that we know guys have to reach. Like I know if I need a guy to play major league center field, certain feet per second we have to be at. There's nobody's running like 25 feet per second, or I mean, I hope somebody can prove me wrong. It's awesome. Let me know if they do, but nobody's running 25 feet per second and playing major league center field. It's just not happening. So if we're looking at a range of 28 to 30, depending on some different things, I know that that metric has to be there. And as I'm working with the organization or our coaches are working with the organization, they want this guy, let's say he's in high A and they want this guy to play major league center field. Okay, well, I know one of the prerequisites that I have to do is I have to make sure the feet per second match. And if it doesn't, then how do I get there? Or how do I need to have a conversation with the front office of here's where we're looking at from a profile standpoint. Is the position a right fit? And so as our organization is really, really open with all these different conversations, and everybody basically is a baseball coach, everybody can talk about whatever they need to talk about. And the feedback is always appreciated. But so as we look at programming for our players, the assessment, one, right? And as we start getting the assessments, right, joint ranges, we use a lot of the Vault tech, right? So 4-sec NOR boards, mid thigh pulls. You start getting into shoulder isometric. You start getting into sprint speeds, 1080 sprint stuff that we have. Now that MLB has everything on Hawkeye, we have basically every on-field thing that you can imagine, every biomech, analysis that we can have. We have a Newt force mound, where we get guys off of that, the force plate mound, so that we can kind of see what's going on inside of the delivery. And so it's like, as we're looking at these guys, though, the number one thing that we have to do is figure out where they're lacking on performance on the field. And if they're not lacking, like you see our center field, like O'Neal Cruz, for example, who plays center field for us. Like O'Neal is from our base, right? He's one of the fastest players in the MLB. He's one of the strongest arms. He, I think, has like 6 or 7 of the top 10 hardest hit baseballs in StatCast has been invented. So when you start looking at different capacities to play center field in the major leagues, like he's pretty built out on our side. That being said, what we have to be more worried about is we're shifting it to the opposite side of how do we keep them on the field every day.
Right.
Now, there's other guys that are up there, and I won't call them out by name here, but there's other guys that are up there that's like, hey, these are certain things that they're lacking from a capacity side that we need to continue to work on even while they're up there. And we're going to focus a little less than we would with O'Neal on the pure health and readiness side, right? It's a tough part about our game. We play 162 games in 180 days. And so you can't just not train to try to get better.
Right. Yep.
And so that gets a tough part of like the readiness is the readiness, but sometimes with some of the guys we're developing, even at the major league level, we're going to sacrifice a little bit of readiness to try to continue to drive performance if we're seeing that the performance is lacking in different spaces. Then as you go down the minor leagues, it becomes more and more and more based on performance because you aren't at the major league performance for the most part, which again is why you're in the minor leagues, right? You're not at the major league performance. Like we have a kid, I sat down with him today because of some things that we were talking about where we need a little bit more effort and that like the attitude's okay. We need more effort though. He throws like 89 to 91 miles an hour. He's a really good pitcher, but he's like 19 years old, and we haven't seen the effort. And from a nutrition side, he hasn't been doing what we really, really want to optimize those things. So it's like with him, we're pushing that a little bit harder on the performance side instead of the readiness, because for him to get to the major leagues at 89 to 91 right now, he would have to end up being an outlier. And we don't want him to have to rely on being an outlier.
Yeah.
And so, like, as we look at developing our programs, what we're trying to do, and like I said, we have certain guardrails. Even as guys go from the DSL to FCL to Bradenton, which is our low A, we have to make sure that they understand the training structure and they understand that certain things are going to be the same as they move up, just within the structure. Right. Like, hey, we're always going to start with a certain type of joint specific warm up. We're going to get into some joint specific work on things that we need to address, whether it be more biology or neurology based, whether we're trying to look for space or not, depending on where we're training a guy. And then after that, then we start getting into a little bit more nuts and bolts of some PQ work. And that's where we start classifying training sessions and working from there. But yeah, it's a kind of a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, and there, honestly, I have a couple follow-up questions. So, and I'll just start with the most recent stuff. So, the joint specific stuff, are you talking like FRC type principles with that? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So we utilize a lot of the FRS stuff. Yeah. I think that's one that I would recommend, like John Quint and Spina and Shivers, right? Quint just was up in Pittsburgh not too long ago with our staff, spending some time. I think that's one that I think more people need to work to understand where the FRS actually is, and that the FRC isn't just something like, I think everybody knows like FRC, right? And they're like, oh yeah, if you need a little bit of mobility, we're talking about FRC. Okay, well, a lot of times when people start down that route, then I would say they probably don't understand exactly what Quint, Shivers, Spina, what they're talking about from an FRS system, like an actual system. Because if you're looking at the actual system, then it's not just hey, I'm looking at joint ranges and I'm looking at joint space. And I think a lot of people only utilize that portion of what was originally probably thought of as the FRC. And so, like, we were talking about the internal strength model, and you're working through some of that. We utilize a ton of that right now. And I'm not saying that we're utilizing it perfectly. I think we're trying to utilize it in the way that our game is letting us right now. And we need to continue to work better and develop better. And so that's more what I'm talking about as we start in joint specific, is we're trying to figure out what's the limiter for a player, right? If it's some of the way he supports and back hip internal rotation, and that's what they're seeing on the field, then we go back to our assessment. We say, okay, what is the actual limiter that we're seeing in the assessment? And then get hands-on guys and try to figure that out.
So is your training staff, I assume most of your staff, if not all of your staff, has at least gone through some sort of FRC, FR, functional range systems training. Because that was something that I kind of struggled with. I never actually went and got my certification. I never really made it fit in my budget. But the Rockies were really big on that. We did a lot of, just again, kind of what you're saying. We probably didn't use it at the level of what we probably should have been using, and we still use it at Fairmont as well. But again, it's more of almost a daily maintenance with the cars and stuff like that. We're probably not really building joint capacity as much as what we should be or what we could be. I think part of that is just the maturity level of college athletes as well, and just the time constraints. But we did use a little bit of like pails and rails and like some of the ISOs and stuff like that at the Rockies. And again, I really loved that. But the one thing that I found was like, and again, I don't ever want to throw anybody under the bus. It's just reality, is what it is. But like then it wasn't always like the training staff was kind of on board with the same thing. Like they're still doing like basic, like passive stretching type bullshit, like to measure joint range of motion, where it's like, yeah, but we need to really know what their active range of motion is. We need to see them in space. Like sitting on the edge of a table and measuring your hip IR probably is not always the same hip IR you have whenever you're loading the back leg to swing a bat. Like it's just probably not. Like I don't think it is. I think there's correlations there, but I don't think it's the exact same hip IR. So is that something that, like, as an organization, even like your whole medical staff is a little bit more on board with the FRS stuff?
Yeah, and I think that just going back to the first question, most of our guys I think we have one newer coach that hasn't really been through it, but obviously been onboarded with us. So that's one that in the off season he's actually targeting to go out as some of his continuing ed and using some of his continuing ed money on that. From a training room perspective, most of our guys do have some education there as well. I think that is probably where I think we have the strength. Our organization is we're super collaborative and there's not really lanes, right?
Mhm.
Like our going back, like we have a rehab strength coach, right? A lot of times when it comes to let's or any of our strength coaches, when it comes to a return to play hamstring, we're trying to get them out of the training room in 48 hours and start with us to start working through things. And then not saying that the trainers aren't doing anything, they absolutely are. But you start handing off different things that maybe at other places is siloed, I guess, to the training room.
Yeah.
And I would say we don't deal with that as much. And I think, I'm pretty proud of that with the organization of where our organization is. But that being said, I think that if you don't, if you haven't been able to get to a lot of things and you don't have the funds to get to a true like an FRS, FRC, FRA course, then what I would do is so Quint came out with a lineman strength book. Okay. Buy the book. It's like an ebook. Buy that, go through it. Uh, Also, I know the absolute strength Substack that they're using, like the yearly cost isn't very much, and it's one that obviously you could jump on and hit and share with your staff. And they have some really good write-ups about some current states of where things are. But the big thing for me, and I think it's something that we probably get ahead of ourselves, is we're trying, like you were talking about complex versus simple when we started. All of this stuff and all of the stuff that these guys are talking about is stuff that were in books 20 years ago if you're reading the right stuff. Like as you start getting into some of the Soviet theory, and I mean, we're talking about Louis Simmons when Louis Simmons was getting things translated out of Russian, right? And so I think that as you start getting into, you know, Verkoshansky, and you start getting into special strengths and, even, and we've worked with him a decent amount from a motor learning side. Um, as you start getting into even like Franz Bosch's stuff, which is like he's worked with us for like probably the last 5 or 6 years in different capacities. As you start getting into his stuff, like there's some of it's controversial, and there's a lot of Franz says things to be controversial sometimes, and then when you sit down with him, it's a little bit different in real life. But it goes back to like Bernstein and all these guys that all of this literature is available as long as you're actually going back and you're reading the true science. It all is common sense of where these things would work. Like for you, what you were just saying, the passive joint ranges, right? So let's take the internal rotation of a back hip, right? If you only have so much passive joint range and then you're getting to more joint range as you get into a swing, we're compensating somewhere.
Right.
And so as we're compensating somewhere, where you have to figure out is what is enough joint range to accomplish the task. And so if you know that he has enough joint range to accomplish the task, then I probably don't need to worry about creating a bunch more space when we have an arbitrary number of 27 degrees or something, right?
Yep. Yep. That
It's
makes sense.
all about the task that we're trying to complete. And so if he doesn't have enough to complete the task and then he's still completing the task, that's where we start running into how's he getting it there? And then you have a guy with a banged up low back, and you have a guy, with some oblique issue or whatever it may be. Like that's where we have to pay attention to it. And that's where I always go to all of our coaches also have to be experts at watching the movement on the field. Coaches see stuff, our field staff coaches see stuff, and they know what the skill looks like. We're the ones that are experts in movement and then can break that down further when your coach comes to you and saying, like, a guy's getting blown up on a block. Like, why the guy's getting blown up on the block when you're looking at the video. Okay. Is it a capacity issue? Is it a leverage issue? Is it that the guy has a fatigue issue and he's getting blown up on a block in the third quarter that he never would have in the first quarter? Right. Is it a motion issue that he just can't get in the right positions? And so that's where, going back to kind of where we started with our programming, like you have to know the on-field goal that needs to get accomplished. And then after that, how do we get there? and what is our assessment saying on what we need to get there. And so like again with some of that FRS, like I think the more you read, the more you listen, the more that you start to understand how simplistic it actually is when you're looking at what is getting done and how they're actually talking about it. Because the first time you take FRC stuff, FRS, FRS courses like the ISM, you're gonna be like, okay, dude, I just left there and I feel like I know less than when I went in because I'm super confused about what we're talking about. And the more you can have a background in some of the actual science and some of the, Soviet training as well, then all of a sudden you're like, okay, actually this makes really, really perfect sense. And it's actually way more simplistic when I'm looking at an athlete than I think. Um, because we all see the outcomes on the field, right? We all see the outcomes on the field, and then just backtracking how to get there. It's just all critical thinking. And then what do we need to do and how do you program? And that's where you start getting into methods can be different to accomplish the same task. But if you don't have the same goal and objective, then it's really tough to get there.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's in our intern. So I obviously have interns at Fairmont, but then I also run an internship program at one of the private facilities in town. And we usually talk about it more from like the coaching cue side of things, but I still think of it from like a program design too. Is like, for me, it's like as strength coaches, we're not worried about whether we're doing a back squat or a front squat or whatever. We're really worried about the outcome. We're worried about the adaptation.
Right.
I think it's kind of like what you're saying. It's really the destination is more important than like how you get there. Like what is the method doesn't matter. It's really like what is the desired outcome, the adaptation. But I did want to go back too, because the thing that probably I'm still not wrapping my brain around enough is, one of the other things too. And again, the Rockies were I think they were kind of a very similar philosophy to kind of how you guys are. And I've been away from that organization for so long. I assume they're still kind of along the same way, but they made us read the the muscles and meridians, the fascial system.
Yeah.
And it's one of those where like, I probably should go back and reread that book, but I remember reading it and just like not understanding literally half of it. Like I'd never heard of it, half of that crap. And it's like that stuff that no one ever talks. Like, I don't think I went through undergrad, graduate school, and I don't know if anybody ever talked about fascia ever. Like, I don't know if I ever heard the word fascia in college ever. And then I get to the Rockies and we're talking about fascia, and we're talking about fascial trainings and like your lateral sling and all like your superficial deep lines and all this shit. And I'm like, I've never heard of any of this crap. So it was like one of those where like I loved being like I not necessarily if I was, but I loved feeling at times like the dumbest person in the room, because again, that's like where most of your growth is going to happen. But I think that's kind of like the same thing with the FRC stuff. You can get very like bogged down and like it can be very complicated, but like you said, it's probably not as complex as it is. It's complicated, but not complex, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Or the other way around. It's complex, but not complicated.
Yeah,
I did want to go back. I did want to go back to a couple of the things that you mentioned though, because I'll just say this one, use this one question real quick. For example, if you get a guy let's say you get a guy that was drafted this year, or is drafted this year, and he's in rookie ball this year. Next year he's in A ball. Obviously, whatever his deficiencies are, whether it's in this situation, we'll assume it's a performance deficiency, like something that can be trained, a strength adaptation, a speed adaptation, power, mobility, something like that. Is that then like when he moves, is that something that you as the coordinator are always in the loop on, or is that something where like he's at rookie ball this year, he has a really good rookie ball like month, they're going to move him up to A ball, and is that something that you're always aware of, like what his plan is, or is that just something that as long as the rookie ball coach communicates with the A ball coach? I guess what I'm getting at is, you mentioned like you have a guy that's going up through your system, and by the time he's in the big leagues, everybody has kind of everybody's been working towards the same goal for that athlete. But how quickly and how efficient is it to kind of communicate what that is? Like, does everybody have like a player sheet that's like, this is their main goal, this is their main deficiency? Is that, I mean, I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know exactly what you guys do, but I guess how would that work? Like, you look at somebody like Steens, like obviously he made his way up very quickly, and I'm sure he doesn't have a whole lot of limitations, or else he wouldn't be able to do what he can do. But like in that situation where somebody's moving up very quickly, how effective and efficient does that communication have to be?
No, it definitely has to be effective and efficient. I think so. All of our players have player plans. Okay, so we have one overarching thing that they are trying to accomplish on the field. That is going to be like, hey, if we nail this, then we're going to progress our career. And that doesn't necessarily mean that like, hey, this is the only thing we're going to nail, and then all of a sudden you're in the major leagues, right? Like we have kids at the lower level where it's like in zone percentage is probably what they're going to have to nail first, because you have to be in zone before then we can start talking about stuff and start working through these different things. But every player has one of those, and every department has certain things that the player can see that is like, here's how we're going to get there.
Mm.
Okay, so when we're talking about the plan, I assume, oh, you're talking about the strength training plan, like
Yeah,
strength
I
conditioning plan,
yeah, I
or
guess like what things that you guys specifically really have an influence on. Like
okay.
if it's throwing strikes, like you guys don't really have as much of an impact on that versus like
Well,
it's like
well, it depends, right? So like that's where it kind of depends. It depends on why he's not throwing strikes, right? If
true.
he's not
Yep.
throwing strikes because we are lacking some of the front leg stability that may be caused by how he's riding the slope down the mound, right? Then we do have an effect on that. If it's throwing strikes because purely everything is great and it may be, some of a mentality,
Psychological
yeah,
thing or something.
psychological, right? Like, yeah, that's probably a little bit different. But that's where, like, I think the longer I've been in this, the more that I've realized we can affect on our side.
Mm.
And I think that there's a lot of times what's troubling for us is you're affecting it subjectively because you don't have an objective way to measure it. And I think the more advanced that on field things get, then we can start to measure things. Like I literally just got a message earlier today about some different things that Hawkeye is doing with some pelvic tilt on front foot land and how they're trying to measure that at high speeds. And like, okay, well, at some point we may actually be able to objectively measure that and say, hey, these guys that are out of these ranges, they struggle to be more accurate, and that's just theory, right? Like it could mean nothing, but there's a lot more that we can affect. But going back to the plan, right? As we're talking about the plan, I don't write any of the plans for any of our guys right now. So I'm not. How it works in our organization is when the new draft players come in, like I will start every single one of those players and I will write an individual program based on conversations and needs that we have, some things that we have seen from pre-draft video, all the pre-draft measurements when those guys come in, where we think they kind of need help, where they actually want help. And I think that a lot of players know where they need the help. And sometimes we just need to get out of our own way and ask the right questions and communicate with guys. But I'll write those and get them started. And then after that, my main concern is trying to say, okay, these players have these goals. The programming that our coach is putting in front of them, is it helping them? And are we seeing progress towards these goals? And how can I help our coaches optimize the programming? And so then as they go up levels, then like I said, we have like a little bit of a guardrail system where it's more of a template type situation than it is anything else. And then as they go up the system, what they're going to see is I'm going to continue to progress towards whatever my goal is. My goal may change as we hit goals or as, you know, certain parts of their game change. Like you have a guy that goes from a starter to a reliever, and now all of a sudden it's going to be a little bit different. You have a guy that goes from middle infielder to center field, which we have happen, at least a couple times every year. That's going to be a little bit different of a goal now. And so as we see those changes happen, our coaches work to change some programming to make sure we can accomplish what it needs to be on that athlete profile now. And then I trust that our coaches communicate well enough and quick enough. And we have transfer sheets, transfer phone calls, all those kind of things as guys go up, that are thorough. And then usually what ends up happening is as a coach or as a player moves up, like he has to have a couple of weeks of programming already built out. So then when, let's say I'm sending a guy to you, I send a guy to you and he's got 2 weeks of programming. Unless something crazy happens or you go to, and you've been in minor league baseball, so you go to a place that doesn't have equipment, right? You're not really changing, like you as a new coach, it's not really changing much in the programming. But what you're doing is you're evaluating it through your lens at how is this driving towards the goal? And then as you start building out that new programming, you're going to take, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is all the conversations that we've had as we're starting to get into, a new phase of the program. And now I'm going to build out the best way I think possible to continue to help this guy hit the goal. And maybe that's just continuing the same kind of thing he was already on. And maybe from your lens and the conversations that you had and the testing that you're seeing and what you're seeing on the field at this different level, okay, here's some different things that I'm seeing that now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to evolve the program. And so I think that that's kind of how we work. And to be honest with you, makes it really, really difficult. And it's way harder to do it that way than me just going, hey, here's a blanket program for everybody based on an assessment and everybody's going to do this program and just run it and complete the play. But I don't think that's the right way to do it. I
Right.
don't think
Yeah.
that's in the athlete's best interest. And I honestly, if I was a coach, I wouldn't want to do that.
Right.
And I don't think it's building coaching and building coaches that our whole goal with our coaches is for our coaches to go somewhere else to lead a program. And you can't do that by me handing you a piece of paper and saying, run the play.
Yeah.
And this is what you got to do, right? Call me if you need to change something. Like
Yeah.
I'm not that guy.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Honestly, it's awesome. And I guess kind of the way that I was thinking about it as you were saying, it's like, if you're at A ball and I'm at double A, not only are you like, is the player moving up, but at least for the next couple of weeks, his program's moving with him. And I'm
Yep.
just going to coach him on the program that you had him on. And then as I see adjustments, especially whether it's an equipment limitation, or maybe he moved up and is getting more reps, or obviously probably equal reps or something like that if he's moving up. It might be something where then I can make small adjustments as I go versus like I've heard from other people that have been in baseball where like you have a guy that's in A ball and he goes to double A and he's doing like he gets there the first week and he's doing every exercise that
Yeah.
he's doing is completely different because that double A strength coach like just didn't want to do what the A ball guy had him doing versus where you guys have at least some sort of plan in place, long-term plan, long-term goal, which does kind of bring me to the one question I wanted to ask is and I love the idea of the individual programming too. Again, it's really hard for us at our level to do that with 400 athletes and like me and two or three other part-time coaches.
Right.
But I do think it's something that we should be doing a better job of, and I think there are ways to even just sneak in some individualization outside of obviously kids that are injured. Kids that are injured are definitely going to be on their own plan. But even like if I have two running backs and one of them likes to back squat, one of them likes to do, you know, uh, split squats, like let them almost have some autonomy and pick what they want to do as long as we're
Right.
achieving the goal. It is what it is. Um, but like in terms of the guardrails, like you said that a couple times, and I know what you're saying. Like it's kind of like a unified but not a uniform approach. I guess is kind of the mantra
Yeah.
with that. Can you give me like an example of some guidelines, guardrails? Like I'm big on at least at Fairmont. I don't know how it might be different. I want to come back to this too, but like I feel like every one of our athletes, at least other than maybe like the golf team, and that's probably about it. I think everybody should sprint at least once a week. I think everybody should be doing some sort of plyos 2 to 3 times a week. Everybody should be doing kind of the
Mhm.
Dan John fundamental human movements mentality. Like, what are kind of like your guys' guardrails that you feel like on average most of your guys are going to be hitting?
Yeah. So I mean, we can start with conditioning. Let's just start there because that one's probably the most simplistic, right? Everybody, like from our reliever side, everybody's hitting 4 to 5 conditioning sessions a week. Now, when I say conditioning sessions, it depends on where they're testing at and what that looks like, right? We use heart rate in every single one of our longer sessions. And when I say longer sessions, more longer in terms of time duration, not necessarily like pound on the pavement duration, and maybe inside and maybe, as you're looking at, um, so what would be like zone two aerobic conditioning? Okay. So a lot of times when I'll speak in zones that, people that are not familiar with like old school Bampa energy system, that's kind of how we do it. My problem with the zones when you're only talking heart rate, uh, like zone two conditioning, everybody knows what that is. Everybody talks about zone two conditioning all the time. As we start getting up different levels, people start to get a little bit unsure unless you're well versed in some of the cardiovascular adaptations that are going to end up happening. Bampa, how he used to do it is he would start at zone one, and zone one would actually be your alactic work. So that would be where you're starting to get into full sprint. And so you had your zone ones, two S, 2C, start getting to 3, 4, 5, 6. And 5 is what is the conditioning zone, like actual cardiovascular zone two that most people know on the heart rate, right? As you start getting into some of that aerobic capacity work. Um, Aerobic compensation in zone six and some things like that. So that's how we classify conditioning so that everybody knows when I'm talking about zone one, then I'm talking about actual muscular output. So like max voluntary contraction type thing. So I'm looking like 90 to 100% there. And I'm looking at full sprints in zone one. As I start getting into like the 2S's and the 2C's, I'm talking the difference between capacity and 2S. So it's a little bit more short. That's where we get into a lot of our agility work. And then, 2L and some things like that. So I encourage people to look up that just as like a different way to look at how you're classifying conditioning so everybody can speak the same language. Because I do think there's probably too many times where we get into here's conditioning, here is sprinting when it's all doing something to the lower half and it all is taking a toll, and you have to know exactly how you're classifying it and how you're looking at it. So as we're doing that, guys that obviously need a little bit more aerobic work, whether that be even relievers need aerobic work, right? Because if we're talking about recovery from day to day, some of that lower resting heart rate in that zone two has shown just general fitness to be highly impactful for guys when you're talking about recovery and injury rates, sleep quality, some things like that. But that's where we try to individualize when we say, okay, where are we breaking off? Can we actually can we fight down that heart rate really, really quickly? Do we never get up to that heart rate, but we sit at a little bit higher range when we're resting? What does that do to the body? And then how can we adjust the conditioning there? Typically 4 to 5 sessions for our relievers. Our starters, depending on if they're on a 5-day or 7-day, that's where you start to get into how many conditioning sessions they're going to do and what their actual focus is. We in the minor leagues has changed since I started to where now it's like a 6-day series where you're at every place. You have Monday off. A lot of guys are in 6 or 7 days all the time. I mean, even the major leagues has changed to where there's not a ton of guys that are on true 5 days anymore because of the extra off days that the unions have added. So as we get in that routine, it's kind of more of knowing the guidelines for the biggest HRV difference and the hardest day in terms of guys being down jump wise. Fatigue would be the day after a guy starts, right? Now, there's some guys that still want to do significant lower body work there, but it's to trust the coaches of if that's a recovery day and we need the recovery day for a guy, how are we programming the recovery day? If it's a guy that wants to train lower half there and they want to do training, okay, then how are we making sure that we optimize the training inside of there? What does that look like on a side day? What does that look like on a 2-day and a 3-day? And so there's a lot of freedom within those 5, 6, 7 days as guys are working through it. So like that's kind of a guardrail. And then when we start getting into training sessions, so I think that the training sessions is and frequency during the week is highly dependent on, the player, how much is he playing, what position, how much high speed yardage is he covering, how does he just recover in general, what's his routine like. And then we have guys going 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, and 6 days. And the 6 days, then that's when we get into like the true micro dosing, where they're coming in, they're spending like 25 minutes with us. And so within each one, we kind of have we don't kind of have, we definitely have a certain layout that guys follow. A lot of times, like I said, there's a lot of joint specific work that we start with. It moves into a little bit more of an explosive block to where we are getting in some of our jump or our med ball work in there, paired with some sports specific. I hate people that say sports specific. I apologize already for saying that. So I would say more position specific work in terms of what movement we're trying to elicit on the field. And then we start getting into, okay, now we're going to get into our big compound movement. What does that look like? And then start getting into, okay, what accessory blocks do we get in? And then the accessory blocks end up being, are we working neurological or biological here? More biological as we move south. And then that's kind of how our guardrails work. Now, the longer you've been in the system as a coach, some of those guardrails start to fall off a little bit. Earlier you're in, you start to have more guardrails where you're not moving as much stuff around. And a lot of times with just how minor league baseball works, you end up starting at a lower level if you're a younger coach, which means then you're training, more general qualities anyways. And so it gives some time to then learn the system and work through everything to where then you have the freedom if you want to move some blocks around a little bit, because at that point you should have the understanding of how the whole system works. And then it's more freedom to move things around. Whereas a first year coach that might be in the FCL, you're training more general qualities. You're probably bucketing players versus pure individualization. Like you're gonna have some pieces that are going to be pure individualization, but for the most part, and like you've seen this is at every level, for the most part, if you get kids with younger training ages, Right? Basic training works. It's fine. Like, yeah, everybody's going to have some different things that they're going to probably need inside of that programming, but basic training, relative strength, relative peak, peak force production, teaching kids different plyometric movements, working some general stiffness, working some general, musculature and starting to fill out a frame. Those things at the lower levels are always going to be there. And so then that template is stricter there. It starts to branch off a little bit as guys go and just to where guys move pieces around. And I think that's where, as guys transfer up and you start to have those phone calls, it's easy for me to explain to you of like, hey, we transferred some things around because of how this guy likes to structure his day. Like we have some guys that come in, they'll do the first two blocks, they'll go hit in the cage, they'll go out in the field, they'll come back in, they'll finish their last two blocks. And that's how they like to do their training session. There's nothing wrong with that. But because I know that, then maybe I'm going to put a little bit more of my explosive work up front instead of pairing that with a compound movement. Because I know when, like, if I wanted to get some PAP work with him, let's say, maybe I'm not doing that because I'm like, you know what, I would rather him come in, hit the compound movement, nail an accessory movement, and then he's done and has the hour and a half until he gets to a game. A player that comes in at noon, gets his whole training session in an hour, like that's probably a little bit different. I can probably be more of a traditional session.
Yeah, no, that
That's,
makes sense. No, I think
sorry,
that's
that's a lot of
awesome.
stuff.
No, I think it's awesome. I think it's definitely one of those things where, um, I think, just having the data points, I think is obviously huge. And that is something I wanted to ask too, like just to be able to track of, are
Yeah.
you actually going towards, like you said, you get a kid, and I don't know if it's still the same, but obviously whenever I was in minor league baseball, a lot of the Latin American players they didn't have the same training age. They honestly, they're
Yeah.
sometimes way better baseball players, but they just haven't have the same training ages, like especially a 21-year-old power four, Division I football or a Division I baseball guy. Like they've literally been in a college weight room for 4 years, and they're just built completely different. Um, so it's one of those where those guys should not be on the same program. Like that 17, 18-year-old, Latin American player, he might need to just do goblet squats or like even a leg press machine or something just to be able to learn how to do shit. Where versus like, so I guess that's my thing is how much also then do you guys look at, you look at training age, you look at, um, measurements, which I want to get to like some of the KPIs and stuff that you're looking
Yeah.
at with some of your sports science, but like how much is it also just kind of getting some personal preference? Like if you have a guy that comes from, I don't know, you draft a kid from LSU and he loves, like for whatever reason, he loves doing like power cleans. Are you guys going to be okay with that? Is that something that you'd be fine with? Or is there still a little bit of like,
Yeah.
nah, that doesn't really kind of fit within our guardrails? Or it's like, you know what, that actually does, that cleans up our, whatever it is, our power production for the day, our rate of force development training for the day. And you know that kid's going to give you great effort because he likes it. Like, or I guess that's my thing is like also how much of what you're saying is because of the idea of you do want to individualize it. Does individualizing can kind of help with buy-in, or do guys also sometimes then be like, man, like, but now because you're telling me what I actually need, I don't get to do the things I actually like to do either. So what's the kind of the give and take with
Yeah.
that?
Well, I mean, I think that there's no good or bad exercise, right? Every exercise can be good or bad depending on what happens. Every exercise isn't good or bad depending on what guys need.
Right.
And so I think we had a kid from Louisville a couple years ago, right? Loves cleaning, right? Power production, probably didn't need to clean. That being said, his clean was really, really good. It's something that he really enjoyed doing. And so it was like, okay, where can we put this in the training session to, is this going to be one of our RFD movements um, for the day? Or is it one that I am going to put in a place to where it's part of almost like getting him ready for what we need to do? And you start doing that because it is one, like, right? Like, guys, being training is tough. We all know that. And you do have to have some things that you enjoy when you train. You can't
Yeah.
always just train shit you're bad at. Anybody that lunges knows that, right? Like, there's hardly anybody that really loves to lunge, but it's something that guys that need it know they need it. But if you just did that and you were like, hey, and then we're gonna do this, it's terrible, and then this and that's gonna suck for you, and this is gonna suck for you, you're just destroying the training session in terms of just the enjoyment of the training session. And you figure that if you're giving up an exercise, you're like, this isn't perfect, but it's not gonna be detrimental to the athlete, but it's gonna help create buy-in for, this, or this that I'm asking him to do. Like, yeah, hell yeah, man. We do that all the time. Like you have to if you're a coach. You
Yeah.
can't be the guy that, and in college it's a little bit different where you can get away with that, but like, and you've seen it, is it's way better to then be like, hey, on this day we're in a squad, we're gonna do all this different stuff, and then I'm gonna let you have some like gun show time at the end, and everybody's jacked up about it, and they know that's coming, and then everybody forgets they had to do like all this shitty stuff at the beginning.
Mhm.
Like, it's a win for you as a coach. And so, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we do. And then on the other side of that too, right? And it's like, it's all great to talk about systems. It's all great to talk about all this process stuff. We have guys that the whole goal is just to get them in the weight room consistently, right? Like we have some guys that they don't want to load at all. And so then what is it? Okay, hey, can we get you to drag a sled? Can we get you, to carry a sandbag? Can we get you, you know, is the win just you coming in and doing lat pull down leg presses because you don't want to do anything? And then because I'm saying, hey, let's do that, I'm gonna sneak in like, hey, what do you think about a couple sets of glute ham today? Right. And so it all sounds great, like what we're talking about. The reality is like there's some guys where just a routine in the weight room is the number one thing. And don't
Yeah.
think that there's not guys that come up to us and come into this in the organization like, hey, just so you know, I don't lift. You're like, okay, that's fine. That's fine. Let's work on some of the other stuff then. And then that's kind of where you work from there of how do I just create a relationship with this guy so then he trusts me. So then when something is happening on the field that he's trying to get better at, now I can use my expertise to say, hey, let's try this and let's just work on this right now. And next thing you know, you may have him in the weight room a little bit, and then things get better on the field, and then you have him in there more, and you got to get that trust. But yeah, you don't get that trust by saying, hey, here's what I like to do, and you're like, okay, that's great. We're not going to do any of that, and here's what I think is best for you when I've known you for about 3 days.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree. That's something that, especially at the lower levels. Which again, I loved working at. I was in A ball. I loved working in A ball when I was
Yeah,
with the Yankees. I would basically be there. I would start kind of. It was basically like a part time gig. I'd start like at extended spring training, and I would basically finish throughout the summer. So I love
yeah,
seeing like their first round draft pick, which usually was there for like 2 or 3 days, if that. I love seeing that guy train like literally heavy squats right next to a Dominican dude that's doing goblet squats with like 35-pound dumbbell. Like
yeah.
it's, you know what I'm saying? Or do the leg press with like 100, like with body weight on the leg press machine. So I love the idea of like having that because you're not doing the cookie cutter thing. Like I said, I like being at the D2 level, but it's 90% of our football players are going to do 90% of the same shit because of just the logistics of
Yeah.
we have to get 120 bodies in the weight room in a 3 hour span. So
Well,
I,
and that's even like even when we're talking about that, right? Is like let's say you running back's a good example. You mentioned that earlier. So let's say you have two different running backs. One is going to be your goal line bruiser. The other one's probably catching pass out of the backfield and is more elastic guy. All right. Even if they're doing the same training session, how we program intensities, speed of movement, different things inside of there, even that ends up being okay. I can individualize there, and I'm
right.
getting more than what I thought I would get before. And I think sometimes people think that individualization is like, oh man, we just can't individualize because I'm gonna have to create this whole new program, all these different things. Well, let's say they're both squatting, and you were like, hey, we're gonna be more of a speed day today. Well, maybe you work one guy from 1 to 1.3 and you work the other guy from zero point 0.7 to zero point 0.9 because you have one guy that's going to be more of an absolute force type of guy where you're going to stay down in the strength speed. Another guy you may need to get up to speed strength work because
Yeah.
of just how his body works and the difference of how he's going to play and what you want to see on the field. Or the opposite is you start getting into the actual play, right? You may reverse that of this guy's never seeing fast inputs and this guy's never seeing slower inputs, and now I'm going to actually flip that. But it doesn't have to be like when we talk about individualization. I think sometimes people try to go too far when
Right. Like
they
you're not going to
don't
have,
have the resources to be able to do it, right? If you're
right.
training a team, you can't do that,
Right.
but you may be able to split some guys off of like, hey, your DBs, like some of your DBs may end up being the same as the pass catching back,
Yeah.
right? In terms of
Yeah.
qualities, and you're going to train them the same. I mean, we ran in the same thing when I was with Central Oklahoma, right? It's like we had 12 racks and all this stuff. One thing that we did when we were out there, and I give it to the football coaches of being open of it, we brought every football coach in and we taught them every new phase. We taught them all the exercises and what we wanted them to look for. And then we had a coach at every rack because all your football coaches, or at most places, your football coaches will be involved if you let them be involved. And so you're like, hey, dude, when we're cleaning, here's what I want to see. Here's what I'm looking for. This is kind of what this bar speed is, if you have some tendo units or not. If not, hey, here's what we're looking on this loading. And then let them help you be coaches, or help you coach and give you some extra hands, because a lot of those guys, like, they're seeing skill too, and it's like, I mean, they can see a lot when they're in the weight room as well. And
Right. No,
so
absolutely. Well, and I don't know if I made it sound like that. I definitely understood that you were like, even what you were saying, like at the lower levels, like you're more bucketing guys. You're not going to have, 35 guys on your, it's not the GCO anymore. It's what, the
I
Florida,
see, oh yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
FCO now, the Florida Complex League, I think. Yeah. So you're not going to have 35 different programs. You might have, at that level, you might only have two or three, versus like at your A ball, and then your double A, you might have 15, where you have two or three guys that are very similar. Like you're like
yeah,
most center fielders are probably gonna be, the same to an extent, kind of cut from the same cloth. Most of your middle infielders are going to be kind of cut from the same cloth. Most of your catchers, they're kind of going to be cut from the same cloth to an extent. You could probably make some assumptions. So, and you can kind of bucket those guys together a little bit. I do want to, that kind of does bring us to like the sports science side. Do you guys have sports science as well? You have that as a
so,
department, or is
so
that you
no,
guys?
no, we don't. That's us. Yeah, like
Okay.
we've had some sports science help before. More the help that we get is we try to get help just from the analytics department to help us as we're trying to answer some questions from a data side. But we don't
Okay.
really have a sports science, and that's one I'm pretty adamant about. I think every strength coach needs to be part sports scientist. And so, like, when we're talking about breaking down data and we're talking about looking through, you know, four stack metrics, we're talking about some of the correlation to on-field performance. Like, yeah, there's stuff that gets outside of our data, just statistics wielding zone,
Right.
that we need to ask for help. But all of our strength coaches are, we're getting versed in sports science and getting application, and how can we, how can we break down that information, display it to an athlete, display it to coaches, use it ourselves. All, like, that's for me is one that I have nothing against sports scientists, right? I just think that sometimes there's this huge reliance on that, and then you have mismanagement of data to the athlete. And so, bless you.
Thank you.
That was a good mute, though.
Yeah.
Uh,
I felt
it
it. I
was
felt
good.
it
Well,
coming.
well thought.
Well, but I agree with you. Like I won't, I won't say this, but I won't say which organization, but it wasn't the Rockies, that I worked at, that they basically had a room full of sports scientists that never came out of this room, just staring
Yeah,
at computer screens. And at least from what I saw, there was really never a lot of like crosstalk between them and the strength coaches. And I think it's better. I think you're better off. I think if you had like one person, like you said, one person that can just help you
yeah,
run the statistical analysis and kind of answer a little bit more questions with it, instead of just like, all right, we have 800 metrics that we just got from one force plate jump. Like, which ones are the most important? I think that's a big aspect. But in terms of like, what's the point of having all this data if me, the strength coach, can't actually then like make a
yeah,
change, like make a substantial change in what I'm doing and make it and help it should,
exactly.
and actually I think this was Coach Kraus. We talked to, do you know Mike Kesey? I'm sure you know Mike. We used to work
Yeah,
for the
yeah,
Yankees. We actually interviewed Mike back in, I guess it was the winter time, and he was saying that when Coach Kraus was there with the Yankees, his big thing was sports science, because he kind of felt like, I guess he kind of had like mixed opinions on it, I guess. But Kesey said that Coach Kraus said that if you're adding all this tech and you're adding all this sports science and it makes your day longer, then you're not benefiting from it. It should make your day easier. It should make our decisions easier as
yeah.
a strength coach. Like if you know that this person sucks at rate of force development, then that's easy. It makes my life easier. I know that I can train him on a certain quality. So with all that being said, what are, I guess, some of the biggest maybe KPIs that you guys see? And maybe I'll just leave it at that, because I definitely am probably gonna have a couple follow-up questions to that. But I guess the biggest, like whether it's one or two, the main couple metrics you're looking at from KPI or from fourth plate metrics. I know Tyler also texted me and wanted to ask what maybe like, I didn't realize that you guys were using GPS, which again, I think that's something that's probably underutilized in baseball for sure. What are the biggest GPS? Is it just high speed distance? Or are you looking at like accumulated load and all that? Which I'll be honest with you, I still don't really understand what that metric is actually telling me, because there's no units to it.
Yeah.
But I guess kind of maybe walk us through a few of the main, like, biggest bang for your buck sports science devices that you're using, and then what some of the
Okay.
main KPIs that you're looking at.
Yeah, okay. So devices, like, we evolved four stacks, right? We have NORBOARD when we're talking about the hamstrings. We utilize the arm care band, when we're looking at different isometrics. And I like that one right now because it gives immediate feedback to the player, and the player has all their information on their phone. And I'm a big advocate of any data that we take on the player, they should be able to have at all times and should be able to see. We also, when we start getting into Hawkeye, that's where we start getting into sprint speed, distance covered, all those kind of things, rotational speeds. Uh, like I said, we have the new force that we utilize with a lot of our pitchers, and that's been a big help, especially as we're looking at a lot of the transference of the physical qualities to the mound. Let me see that, we start getting the ranges. Ranges are fairly simple of how we take those, much like probably everybody else does. Grip testing at different times, looking at different rotational testing. We don't really do movement, like a movement assessment or anything like that, because if you're getting joint ranges, you've kind of already bypassed the movement assessment. And I could get on a soapbox about the FMS if people wanted to. It's just like people do the overhead squat and then they do all the range of motion, right? It's like, well, if you did the overhead squat, that got you to know you needed some ranges to check in. And if you already got the ranges to check in, then why you need the overhead squat unless you're just testing and the squat is your actual, performance movement. That being said, like movement assessments at lower or at different levels where you have 400 people to run through and you want to do that to then find out who you need to do additional testing on, like that's why it's made that way. So all bang on the movement assessment in our space, but not in other spaces depending on how you're using it. But then as we're looking at that, right, and we're going to talk about, let's just talk about jumps, right? So we've been using Vault for 6 or 7 years now, maybe a little bit more than that. We have I want to say somewhere between like, I don't know, probably like 80 to 100,000 jump sessions of 3 jumps a piece or whatever it is. As we work through, and then we look at all of our on-field data and we say, okay, what does this correlate to? And then you have a different jump KPIs potentially for performance sometimes than you do for readiness. And so as we talk about those things, those are 2 different things. Some of the big ones that we look at though, as we're looking at it, right, RSI is a good base to give you just a general outlook of what's happening in the jump. I think, well, we'll go into problems with that here in a second. RSI, right? I like vertical velocity of takeoff. Vertical velocity of takeoff, and jump height are highly correlative. That being said, vertical velocity of takeoff, as we start getting into some of the readiness, gives us some different things than just jump height would. But both of those also correlate to top speed production. And that's what we found is like highly correlative to top speed production. Concentric and eccentric impulses, utilize those in different fashions. One that we use that's probably different than other people, and I understand why people don't use it, because it is one that when you're talking about the reliability of it, you have to really be careful with how athletes try to like gamify and cheat the system. But we use CMJ stiffness. And so CMJ stiffness, what that is the peak force you're creating and the depth that it takes you to create that peak force. And so just as you're thinking about your different profiles of athletes, guys that have to get to deeper depths to create force, right? So these are typically where you see a lot of your more just like big force monster type guys. So it's like a lot of your linemen, especially offensive linemen, will kind of be those dudes. And so like you're just it's the old school thing of like, let's have the Vertec, right? Like your linemen are going to most of the time be super deeper jumpers to produce force, whereas a lot of your DBs and some of your wide receivers are going to be guys that are going to have that little dip, right? And so as you start looking at that, because of the depth being the denominator, then you start to get a real look at the guys that can create stiffness quickly. And so as we start looking at that, there's a fine line, because there are some things that get in too quick of stiffness can relate to, soft tissue injury, is kind of what we have found. And as we look at in the lower extremities, guys that don't create enough stiffness, and especially in the sport like ours, that isn't an absolute strength sport, but is a sport where you're working off high speed, then you have those guys that like it's tough to be a middle infielder if you're one of those guys, right? If you're a big counter movement monster, it's really tough to play middle infield and stick there. A lot of times those profiles get moved to center field where you can rely more on top speed and some of that closing. And so like those are the kind of the main ones we use in the jump. There's a lot of other like there's relative peak power and there's some things like that as we start to profile some athletes we can look at. But really what we're doing is we're using those and then we're working on okay, what does an athlete's profile look like? See a counter movement based guy that we needed to create force. Okay, that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing, but that will tell me on the position he's playing, what do we need to do moving forward? Is he a guy that relies purely on stiffness because, we're so far advanced neurologically than we are from biological standpoint that I need to put him into, way more biology work. And if I don't, then I'm worried that our neurological outputs are going to cause soft tissue injuries. Like those are more what we're looking at is we're looking at the lower half and the jumping. When it comes to some of the shoulder KPI stuff, like still one of the most studied and one of the ones that is probably the most beneficial, especially if you're talking to health or certain ranges of shoulder balance with IR and ER. I think that what we found in our population as we get in, we'll just talk the arm care band because it's the one that we've been using the most over the last few years as we've been getting integrated with them. Like they have certain ranges of strength. The difference for us is because the population we're in, like our levels of strength are significantly higher than some of their recommendations, but because most of these guys that come in already throw hard. Like we're hand picking guys that are 93, 95 plus, right? Like we don't have a lot of guys that are under 93 anymore. I mean, the whole game doesn't anymore.
Right.
It's just not what's happening with the game. The NOR board, we look at certain ranges. What we found is, I think the old way Vaughn used to talk about it is because it was mainly European football related. Was like, hey, if you're over like a 300 newtons, then you were in a really good place where you weren't going to have soft tissue injuries. What we found is because you're also dealing with European football, one of the things is like frames are fairly, frames and weight are fairly consistent. So that we kind of have we like to see guys at like 2.5 times their body weight on that. And then we do a lot of testing in like ISO testing prone to where there's like, somewhere around 10 degrees ish of knee flexion, because that's what you're looking at when you're talking about the hamstring at, in the running position.
Right.
That's kind of where you're looking at and how the hamstring's working isometrically as that leg swings through and you get that foot in that position. We have actually probably been utilizing that more and been moving more towards isometric testing. And we utilize ballistic isometrics when we test that. Then we're getting a long duration. And if we have some imbalances, we're trying to figure out, okay, is like something neurological with the test? Is it an actual biology issue? And we saw that we actually were just working through with another player that has some history from other organizations with some hamstring history to try to tease some of that out so we can start getting into training. And then the new force is like, that's a whole nother episode, probably.
Yeah, I never heard of that. I
Yeah.
never heard of that. I feel like I've heard of that. I was actually trying to look that up real quick. The arm care band.
Yeah, the
I
arm
feel like
care
I've
band
heard
is
of it.
just like, it's just on the wrist. It's a dynamometer that basically,
Yeah. Okay.
it's a good tool. I like it again because it's really easy for the players to do. They get feedback right to their phone when we have accounts for them. And they have all that stuff stored with them. If we have guys that need to take it home, that we have some balance issues, that's something we're working on in the off season. They can take it home with them, throw it in the backpack, connect to their phone and work through that. We spend a lot more time with IR and ER on that than we do on other things.
Yeah.
But
I think one of the guys that I used to work at the one private gym here. I think he works at a place down in what is it, 108 or 180 athletics down in like Tennessee or
yeah.
something like that.
Yep.
He works there now, and I think they're using it down there. So I think that's maybe where I heard of it. One thing that you mentioned, the vertical velocity at takeoff. And then you kind of mentioned RSI. One of the things that I've kind of come across, and again, we actually exercise physiology department has just got force plates. So we
Nice.
are going to start be able to kind of coordinate with them a little bit and do some testing for our athletes. Um, One of the things that I was reading or looking at the other day is time to peak velocity being a good
Yep.
metric of whether you're determining should that athlete, kind of what you were saying about the offensive lineman versus like a skill player. And again, I think sometimes us as coaches, and this kind of goes back to even what you were saying about like watching guys on the field, like you can almost kind of start to bucket guys without really ever almost having some metrics on them. Like,
Yeah,
you know what
for
I mean?
sure.
Like I said, like some guys are just going to be like, you're gonna see like your shortstop and your second baseman, like they're going to just
Yeah.
be a certain type of guy most of the time. But he was talking about that or whatever I was reading. They were talking about that as a good metric because of the fact that it kind of tells you is an athlete creating all this, I guess, vertical force, but downward force. Are they creating that via more of like the muscle or more versus like the tendon and the elastic tissues and
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
like that? And I've never really looked at that metric. That wasn't something that the place that I've been at that we've used force place in the past. They looked at time to peak velocity, and they were actually looking at it even using it just in the weight room setting of like if you have like velocity based devices of when does that athlete hit that? Are they hitting it early in a squat? Or are they hitting most people are going to hit it later in squat anyway in their range of motion, but how long does it take them to get to that point? Like
Yeah.
what is the delay? Are they hitting it, you know,
Yeah. Like, what does that
in,
curve look like?
exactly what does that curve look like? And I think that's just something interesting. Again, we don't have velocity based devices. It's another thing that I'm hoping I can get the money put together this summer to finally invest in. But I think it's something that would be very interesting to look at. And that goes back to even like the running back example of, you know, should we be having the running backs continue to train? If you have a running back that's very elastic versus one that's more of a muscle, I hate to say like force dominant or whatever, but that's everything's force, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's are they being more reactive with their force production, or is it more of a muscle like the muscle belly creating the force? Um, I think that's one of those where I look at that and I'm like, okay, well, that's what they're already good at. So should we keep doing more of that type of training, or should we actually do the? So I'm always kind of like back and forth, and I think that's one of those where like I don't know if I have a great answer for that because it's like I don't want to get away from, I don't want to have them not do what they're already good at, but I also want
What
to enhance the thing that they're not good at. So it's like I think
what
there's a
I
little bit of give and take there.
also think that depends on where they're at in their yearly practice schedule too,
Yeah,
right? If the guy that's super elastic is on the field all the time, then you probably don't need to worry about that as much because he's practicing those qualities all the time.
right. Every day. Yeah,
Every day he's practicing those qualities. And so you can probably say, okay, I'm gonna back off and I'm actually gonna work on some other things with him and I'm gonna kind of go from there. I think it's just something that like the whole neurology focus is something that I think that it's kind of gotten overblown in terms of how much we're actually training it because one, it's sexy, two, it looks good when we get on social media, and three, it's like, yeah, dude, the more plyos we do, the more high speed rebounds that we do, some things like that. It's like, yeah, that's fun to watch and train. You get some feedback way quicker. You may get some gains really, really quickly. But then what ends up happening is all of that underlying musculature and the connective tissue doesn't get trained well enough. And next thing you know, it's like crushing Achilles, you're getting a lot of soft tissue
yeah.
damage because your training neurology is so much higher than where all that connective tissue is at.
What the capacity of the tissue itself is. Yeah,
Yeah, and so I think that sometimes people forget that, and so that's where it's like, hey, at some point you probably are going to train a lot more neurology with him because he's not actually doing it that much, and you want to make sure that you upkeep that or advance that. And then once he starts getting into that, you're probably saying, hey, I'm just going to kind of shift to the other parts that he's not getting to do very much, and I'm going to shift back to some of this connective tissue work. And so I think that you know I think that's always the hard part about the answer, right? Is that it's a sliding scale all the time. And I also think that's where you have to be training all these qualities all of the time in some capacity.
yeah,
And you're just trying to make sure that you're doing your best to get the recipe right,
yeah,
which we're never going to get it perfect, but we can try to, make it the best we can.
yeah. No, that's a good point because like that was actually going to be one of my questions too. Is obviously like normally I ask coach, especially when I'm talking to like college coaches of like how does your in season training look versus like your out of season training. But again, in baseball, it's like you're basically in season for 9 months, and a lot of those guys are
Yeah.
doing almost as much volume of their skill work even when they're in the quote unquote off season. They're just not
Yeah.
playing a 3 hour game 6 days a week. So I guess what I kind of want to ask, and again, I felt like when I was with the Rockies, we did a really good job of this. Of we weren't just content with like maintaining throughout the season. Like it wasn't just
Yeah,
like, all
for
right,
sure.
you survived spring training. Now you're just gonna just hope that you hold on to some qualities through the next 9 months. Because like that's just impossible. You're not gonna maintain qualities for 9 months. If you're not trying to actually improve them. So
Right.
you mentioned this earlier about like um you were talking about like a center fielder that needs to get needs to get faster. Like you actually have metrics that you can measure. Like does he have the speed right now to actually be able to play at the highest level? How and this kind of goes a little bit into like the guardrail question, I guess too. But like how does like this from a speed and like power development aspect. Obviously, most of the power stuff's probably going to be going in the weight room, but from a speed development, is that something that you guys are doing as part of a training session early in the day, or is that something that you're going to wait until game time and just have that guy? You're looking at like maybe like a weekly scale of like, hey, we need to have this guy. He needs to get faster. So before the game, we're going to do just some basic like speed drills, whatever, just bounding or
Mm.
band accelerations or
Yeah.
whatever it is, as almost part of like a primer going into the game. But that is kind of his microdose, and this is probably a very individualized answer, I guess, now that I'm thinking about it. But I guess from like just a general broad sense, like is most of that like specifically in like a speed development standpoint, because most people are going to shy away from working speed development, especially when you're going to play 6 games in a row. Like
Yeah.
when do you fit in a speed development training session? Um, I guess how does that look? Like, what is most of it microdosing on a day-to-day basis? Is most of it like, or you are going to actually have a one of those, if it's a guy that's on a 4 or 6 day training program, is one of those or two of those days going to be something where like, hey, we actually want you to do like 3 sets of 10-yard accelerations with a sled, 3 hours before a game or whatever it is. I guess I love speed training, so that's something that I'm kind
Yeah.
of want to kind of hear what your focus is and what your process is on that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess since I've been here, we've done it so many different ways. Like we've done group sessions, we've done, you know, individual sessions, we've done stuff before the game. We've done stuff after the game when I was here at some points with guys that didn't play. I mean, the easy answer that doesn't answer your question is it does. It just depends on
Yeah,
on who it
right.
is. I think try to utilize some things with the training sessions for sure. There definitely are some guys on the 6 days that they have individual days that are more speed focused. That then it's trying to just figure out, all right, hey, are you going out to do individual defense, and then how do we figure that out before that at 3 o'clock, so that
Mhm.
then we feel like we're almost using it as an extended activation, and then you get in some drills like as you're talking about, more of a traditional active warm up, and then getting into your drills. We have some guys that their explosive work in the weight room ends up becoming sprints, and that gets tricky depending on what facility you're at. Like obviously at our academies, that's easier because you can just walk right out the garage door to a field. Uh, at an affiliate that becomes a little bit more difficult. So then it's also piecing together, okay, when we're talking about speed as an issue, why is speed an issue? Right? Is speed an issue because of we don't have the relative power to propel our body just in general? Is it because we're over frame weight and there's some different things that we're going to talk with our dietitians about, and our dietitians are going to do work with them? Is it because we actually just can't coordinate a sprint very well, which then
Right.
becomes, oh man, now that is kind of a harder
Yeah, because
situation to deal with in
that's like
season.
that might be a ship that's already sailed if you get a kid
It
out of
could be,
college and
right?
he's been
It's like,
sprinting that same poor sprint pattern for the last 16 years, like
yeah,
since he was 5 years old. Like, yeah.
yeah, and then the other thing is too, right? Is if the guy is a fringe player on that, then how much time are we going to spend to make sure that he goes off of being a fringe player there versus if he's a fringe player there, we can keep him to be a fringe speed player there. What does he have to do better on the other side of the ball to where that doesn't matter anymore?
Yeah, that's
Now you
true.
never and so like that's where I think our sports like it is kind of hard because you have guys that are like fringe defenders or bad defenders because of things like that, but because of the impact of baseball a different way, then nobody cares, right? Like we had a guy that was a first baseman here is like not a great first baseman. Like defensive ratings were somewhat poor, but hit 30 a year. And so it's like, hey, you deal with the other side of it. That
Mhm.
being said, are we going to spend a ton of time trying to say, okay, how do we make his footwork better? Like, yeah, we're going to spend some time on that because we are going to try to make that better. But that being said, it's like, okay, how do we make sure that he can try to hit 30 every single year and try to, strengthen the strength? And then
Yeah.
how do we hide the weakness a little bit behind that? And so, like the speed work stuff, I think when it's actually true, like you're working sprint tech, then it becomes more of, I mean, that's where Franz has helped us a lot with some of the attractor work. If you can break down exactly what's going in there, you don't always have to train it with sprinting. At some point, you have to get to application, but that application might just come in the game, and you're trying to piece it together with different drills and some different things to where you don't have to add a ton of fatigue to it.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, would I love? Would I love to be able to take guys and do a ton of sprint work with them? Yeah, definitely. And I think baseball, it's just such a low hanging fruit of a lot of guys are just bad runners that need a lot of work. That being said, like with where, like you're saying, with some of the skill work and some of those things, a lot of times it's better to really tackle in the off seasons. Like, how do we microdose like different pieces all the time to then try to get a little bit better during the season? To then, if he's a guy that we really, really need to tackle, how do we do it?
Yeah. That makes sense. Um, Yeah, and I guess I was actually thinking like you're talking about that guy that hits 30 home runs. Like, I mean, just moving to a DH, like he doesn't even worry about he can just jog around the bases at that point. He doesn't have to worry
Right,
about he
right.
doesn't have to worry about his footwork at first base or running fast. But no, I mean I think it's cool. I think that I do want to get to just a couple last minute questions about like
Yeah, no
just
problem.
for advice for young coaches. But the last thing I wanted to ask about that, I mean, and this is kind of just again me thinking probably very strength coach perspective versus like minor league GM, baseball coach, baseball player of
Yeah.
like at what point does like the physical development as well as the skill development, at what point should that or does that trump like winning and losing games at the lower levels? Like, I mean, if is it
Oh
something
yeah.
where like it's worth it's worth like having a guy be a little bit sore because we're trying to make his rate of force development go up or his relative power or his just absolute strength or whatever? Is it worth having him be a little bit sore and maybe not have the best game that day versus like we're so afraid? Because like again, I never really ran into this to an extent when I was in pro baseball, but even in the baseball world now at the Division II level, we fight this all the time where guys are like we'll have guys that are 3 days from their next chance that they're going to pitch, and they're like, I don't want to go as heavy today because I'm gonna have to pitch in 3 days, or I might have to throw a bullpen later today. It's like, dude, you're throwing a 15, 20 pitch bullpen. I'm asking you to do 5 sets of 5 on squat. Come on, you literally
Right, right,
can't do
right.
that. Like, if you can't do that, you probably shouldn't be. And that's what I always end up having to be an asshole about it. Be like, if you guys can't do what I'm asking you to do in a 45-minute training session, then you probably shouldn't be a college athlete. Like, I just hate to be an asshole about it, but at some point in times, it's like, dude, what are we here for? We're here for physical development, especially in the fall. Like, I'm talking about guys will say that to me in the fall. It's like, hey, I got to throw a
Yeah.
bullpen today, a fall bullpen. I'm like, are you here to like only throw 84 miles an hour for the rest of your career? Or like, do you want to actually try to build some? So I guess my
Right.
question is, at what point should or can or does what we're doing? Because I love the fact that you guys are very integrated with like your approach and that it does seem like there is a lot of belief in your organization of how important the physical aspect of it is, and it's not just like skill is king. Doesn't matter if you ever develop any better physical qualities. Like, it seems like you guys aren't really in that same mantra. You're more of like, hey, there is a skill aspect, but we can maybe
Mhm.
enhance some of that and develop some of that because we're building better physically developed human beings. So I guess at what point does the physical capacity versus the skill component, especially when you're playing 9 months out of the year, like how do you balance that throughout the year? I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's when you as an organization and as a team decide that the physical development is what is affecting the skill, right? And that is what is affecting the on-field output. And at that point, then you do have to make the decision of, okay, what piece of the pie does everything get? And we do have like we have some guys that I have a guy that's down here right now that was kind of the consensus, and he got moved away from his affiliate that was a higher level down to our Florida complex, and he's here to train. Like he's here to train for the next, you know, probably 6 to 8 weeks to see, hey, what can we elicit on the next 6 to 8 weeks to try to get the most out of this guy when we're looking at capacity. Now, is 6 to 8 weeks pretty short? Yeah. And are we going to get the most out of that 6 to 8 weeks as we would, or are we going to get what we would out of 6 to 8 weeks of what we probably need of like 16? Probably not. But that being said, like that's the aggressiveness of kind of where we're at with that. Like as soon as you're looking at, you know, as soon as like the 84-mile-an-hour guy is a good example, right? Like, okay, what's your ultimate goal with this guy? Is it to pinch at your school or is it to get drafted? If it's to get drafted, then the conversation needs to be, okay, we don't have the capacity to get drafted because for you to basically throw 84 to 86 miles an hour and get drafted is damn near an impossibility at this point, unless you are a complete unicorn at something, you know, that has something that an analytics department probably loves in a pitch metric, right? And you don't want to have to be that guy. So then for me, it's like, okay, that's one that's like pretty easy and everybody would agree. And I think, again, I think that our organization, you know, that's part of what I like about it is a player like that, like the one I had at the beginning of our conversation that was like 89, 91, and that went to have a conversation with him today about some of these same things. Like the focus is capacity on this guy. Like we are going to focus on that. And that probably is going to mean that we're going to have to adjust some of his on-field stuff. Like maybe he's a starter, maybe he's throwing a touch and field instead of a side in between so that we can get more work. Maybe he's a guy that instead of a 5-day, we're going a 7-day so we can get more training sessions in between and feel like he's safe when he's on the mound. Like, I mean, I think again, just if the physical qualities are truly what is limiting the on-field skill and the on-field skill development from getting to the point where you can play in the major leagues, that's where all of a sudden now that kind of trumps the other, because the skill is probably what has got them there at this point, and now we need to focus on the other part. Whereas we definitely have guys that are the other way. We definitely have guys that, hey man, some of your skill stuff is behind, and you got here because of the other portion of that you're a freak of an athlete, and now we have to refine the skill part. And I'm the first guy to push those guys out of the weight room. Like, dude, you're gonna spend way more time out there, and like you're gonna come in and we're gonna basically maintain some of the qualities that you have, but your qualities are so high and you're such a good athlete that we need to work on the other stuff. We see that a lot when we have converted, converted pitchers. Like you were a college shortstop or outfielder, you dabble in some pitching like your senior year, you get drafted because you throw 97, but you don't really know how to spin it. You don't have the secondary stuff. Like you're probably going to spend some more time working through some of that stuff. And, then you may with me on some different things, trying to push capacities. And I'm going to make sure that you're ready to throw more often so you can practice your skill. And so that's kind of where that continuum probably lies, and kind of how we figure that out, I guess.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And again, I think it's obviously very unique, especially to a sport like baseball, because it is. I mean, not that every sport's skill oriented, but like I think football, you can get away with being just a lot more physical. Basketball, even to an
Yeah.
extent, especially at certain levels, you can get away with being very physical. But baseball is such a skill. I mean, I've never really played golf, but I feel like just from what I've gathered, it's aside from hitting a baseball, hitting a golf ball, hitting a golf ball is probably the hardest thing you can do on the planet. Hitting a baseball is probably the second hardest thing. So there is absolutely a skill component to it. Um, just real quick, we'll kind of maybe do like just a little lightning round. The last couple of questions here.
Yeah, no problem.
Biggest change, perspective change, things like that, philosophical change that you've made over your career so far.
Uh, Methods don't really matter. Like I think that's been the biggest one. When I came in, it was like, oh, it has to be a certain way. I mean, I came from just south of Columbus, Ohio. We're box squatting everybody. We're doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
Like these are the methods that matter. This is how we're gonna get good. Like methods don't matter. It's there's a ton of different ways that you can get to the same point as long as you're aiming in the right direction.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I didn't realize you were from Ohio. So yeah, you kind of probably grew up in that west side, the shadows of
Oh
west
yeah.
side. So, did you ever get to go? Have you ever been at West Side or got to meet Louis or
No,
anything?
no, no. I worked under like 3 different guys that were there,
Yeah.
but I never got up to meet Louis while he was still alive. Now.
Yeah, we were fortunate. The gym that I worked at here in town, in Morgantown, they had a powerlifting meet, and they brought a couple of their guys down, so I got a chance to literally talk to him for like 30 seconds one time. But it's one of those where like that's a 30 seconds that like
Yeah, it's awesome.
it's pretty special. So, what do you look for? Actually, let me ask this other one first. What do you think is something that a lot of the young coaches that you guys hire, like a lot of things that they run into? I mean, is it because they're probably so glued to like certain, they're married to certain methods and things like that, and they're not as open-minded? Like, what are some of the biggest things when you guys hire somebody new? What are kind of those initial battles that maybe you're butting heads with them about?
To be honest with you, it's a lot of guys kind of getting in and working from the on-field portion backwards. I think that's something that, doesn't happen in a lot of places. And then that's number one. Number two, I think, is just conditioning knowledge. And I think it's something that all of us that have come from colleges probably don't get enough experience actually talking about like the physiology of conditioning and what's actually happening inside the body. And so I think those two things are usually the ones that are fairly normal, that we see.
Yeah. Because I agree with you. Like, and I was actually, I got two of our former athletes are programming, or I'm programming for them right now. They both want to compete in one of those High Rocks events, which
Yeah.
I literally had never even heard of it until like 3 months ago when they asked me
Oh, yeah,
about
it's
it.
blowing up, man.
And it's blown up. And honestly, it's pretty cool. Like I think it's something that like I
Yeah.
think is a really cool thing to do for them to do. And they're like a boyfriend girlfriend couple, so it's cool to see them training together and pushing each other. And it's been fun for me to program for them this summer because it's just something it's completely something out of not out of my wheelhouse, but just something different. Something it's not
Yeah.
it's not programming for a sport. It's programming for like a specific fitness competition. And I do realize that I understand the energy systems and I understand just the very basics of the conditioning aspect. But again, I'm so like anaerobic, like I love anaerobic conditioning. I love that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Like I can do assault bike intervals, but if you tell me to go out and run like the program for somebody that running a 5K, I'm like, I don't really care about that. Like I have no interest in that. So what would be your biggest piece of advice in terms of like I was looking up the Tudor Bumpa stuff, and I actually got to see him speak a couple years back as well. It was probably like 10 years ago now. What would be like the best books or YouTube channels or something like that to kind of look into the conditioning stuff that you were referencing?
The conditioning stuff, actually, hold on, let me pull one because there's
Yep.
I always go back here and I'm not 100% sure where I put it out right here. All right.
No, you're
Yeah,
good.
like this one's solid, man. The solid I don't know if you can see it.
Scientific training for
Scientific
endurance athletes.
training of for endurance athletes. Like I would say it's probably one of the like it's a very simplistic read, and but what's inside of it, and actually as you're talking about some different training, and building training and the science behind it, I would say that's a great starting point.
Okay.
Um, because that's the other thing too is like a lot of times when you start getting into physiology of endurance training, then you're actually just looking at physiology books, and then you're like, okay, let me skip past some chapters and let me like look through these things. So I think that's probably one of the better ones that I would recommend as you're looking through training endurance athletes.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like I said, it's a pretty simplistic read. It's a good background book that then you can kind of dig deeper off that.
Gotcha. No, I appreciate that. I'll definitely check that out. All right. So then what is kind of on that same note of like young coaches or just new coaches? Like what is something that when you guys are hiring somebody, and not even necessarily just for the Pirates, like if you were just going to hire
Yeah.
somebody to work alongside you, what are some qualities that you look for? What are some things that stand out? Is there anything like that pops out on their resume typically? I guess kind of what are those biggest, the most makes them the most marketable, I guess I would say.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you remember is like resume is just like a screening tool, right? It's like
Yeah.
as a resume, that's a screening tool for me to then give you a phone call. And once we get in the phone call, 99% of the questions I'm going to ask is going to be more of how are you solving problems, right? What's your ability to critically think? How are you solving problems? And then, you know, I want people to want to work. Like if you're talking to me first off about like work-life balance, like we're probably not in the right spot. I always tell people like everything that we do, I'm kind of the thought is like you're in startup mode to where it's like I want guys that want to sleep at the office, that want to be around, that are gonna, the day gets done and I'm gonna walk out of the office, I'm gonna walk back in at like to meet with somebody or whatever. And a bunch of my guys are still there because they're sitting there talking, working through things, talking about athletes. Like I have coached in spring training. You know how long the days are in spring training? It's like all our coaches will all have to go upstairs for some meetings after with like very like, different front office things or whatever I have to deal with. And I'll come back down and it'll be like we got done in the day at 3:30. It'll be 6:30 at night, and we got two coaches still sitting there chopping it up, talking about like, hey, I got this problem with an athlete, and we're working through this, and they're whiteboarding stuff, and they're looking through all that. Like, that's really what I want to see is guys that one can solve problems and two, to just critically think through solutions because it's all
Yeah.
we really are. It's like we're problem solvers that just got into this industry. Like I would
Yep.
take a bunch of the guys that I have in the office and I'd be able to say, hey, if I have a problem, like shit, if I had a problem at my house, like and I told you what that problem was, like you probably figure out how to solve it, whether it be, hey, I'm gonna go find information, I'm gonna call somebody to ask these things, I'm gonna do all this, and I'm gonna
Right.
figure out how to solve it. It's not like, oh, I'm just gonna let the problem sit.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So it'll be, yeah, it's not my problem. It's somebody else's problem. Like instead of being like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I think that's cool. And again, I think that's something like, that I think gets overlooked. And again, that's something that I don't think we get taught in school. Like, again, not that we should always
No.
rely on what we get taught in school, but it's like, I've learned more about, I mean, I've been a strength coach now for 10 years, but even when I was when I was 2, 3 years into my career, like I learned more in those 2 to 3 years by actually just getting on the floor, coaching, problem solving, working with
Right.
working with horrible athletes, working with really good athletes. You learn so much more than like what you could ever
Yeah.
actually learn by just sitting in a classroom. So it's one of those where I think being a constant learner, that's something that I'm big on is like a constant learner. Like I said, like I'm going to get that book and I'm going to read that book because not because I plan to work with a lot of endurance athletes, but I think it's something that's going to transfer over to all the athletes that I work
Yeah.
with. Like,
Well, that's the thing is like it's something you don't know, right? And it's something
yeah,
you don't know, and that bothers me.
yep,
Like, I mean, I'm like almost finished renovating a house right now on a house my wife and I bought, and we tore a bunch of stuff down the studs and all these things. And it's like it bothers me to bring people in to do stuff, even though it
yep,
probably shouldn't, just because
yep,
I want to know how to do it. And it's like,
yep.
do I'll redo it 3 or 4 times just to make sure that I know how to do it. And it's like, yeah, this is my wife probably get frustrated when it could have been done in a week and it's taken me a month. Yeah, I'm sure. But,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, no, but you're building your toolbox by watching or
exactly.
by learning how to do stuff on
Exactly.
your own. So,
Yeah.
well, Coach, man, this has been great. This has been shit. We've been going for almost 2 hours, so I really appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, no
Um, I,
problem.
I honestly, it's crazy. We went for 2 hours, and I feel like there was so much information, and I still feel like we're definitely gonna have to do maybe another episode at some point, maybe in the off season
For sure.
when you're not as busy, we'll kind of catch back up. But I appreciate it. Is there do you mind like if guys and my female coach as well, like if they like you have Instagram? I think you have Instagram, right?
Yeah, I have Instagram. I mean, they can reach out to me on that. I mean, to be honest with you, anybody that you want to share my phone number with, that's the easiest one. If they shoot me a text,
Yeah.
that's
I'm hesitant
probably
to
the
do that,
easiest
but if
way.
it's the right person, I'll
I
if
was
it's
gonna
the
say,
right
yeah,
one of my former coworkers and they have the right reason to reach out to you, I'll definitely share it with them.
yeah,
But as long as they have a way to reach out to you on social media or something, and like I said, this will be on YouTube, so they'll be able to kind of uh see it and kind of if they have any follow-up questions, I'll make sure I get
yeah,
those
for
to you.
sure.
So, but I appreciate it, man. Good luck to you guys the rest of the summer.
No, thank you, and hey, I appreciate you bringing me on, man.
Yep, have a good one. Thank you.
Yeah, you too.